In this lesson, we'll learn about the power of Illustrator's pen tool. All right, so in the previous lesson, we started drawing some basic shapes. Now, in my opinion, the most powerful and versatile drawing tool included within Illustrator is going to be our pen tool. Now, the pen tool sits right over here in our tool panel. It's the keyboard shortcut P to access this. Now, before we actually start drawing with the pen tool, if you remember back when we were talking about our selection tools, I mentioned that the direct selection tool, this white arrow here, can be accessed as a modifier key. And I'm going to go ahead and select it now so we can access that from the pen tool. I'm going to go ahead and select our pen tool now using the keyboard shortcut P. And now you can see if I go ahead and hold down my control modifier key, we can switch over to that convert anchor point tool. Now, the pen tool is going to basically draw in paths. So notice here I have a black stroke selected, and I've selected that so you can see the path that I'm drawing. So let me go ahead and zoom in here, and let's talk about drawing the most basic type of path, which is a straight path. Now, remember, a straight path has to have an anchor point on either side. So we can create anchor points with the pen tool just simply by clicking on our artboard here. Now I've clicked one time and dropped one blue anchor point here. So we can also do that with our tablet by just tapping on our tablet with our stylus. So I'm going to come over here and create a second anchor point, and you can see here that by clicking and adding that anchor point, the pen tool creates a path between the two anchor points. Now if we're done drawing our path, we can simply hold down the control modifier key and deselect it by clicking away from it here. Now, one important thing about the pen tool is it has several different states that it can be in. For example, right now you see that it has a little X next to it. This X indicates that the pen tool is ready to draw the first anchor point in a new path. Now, if I were to, for example, mouse over this existing path that we just drew, again, you can see that it's still an X. But as I mouse over one of the anchor points, that X changes to a little slash. Now, what that slash means is that we're mousing over either one of the two end anchor points for a path. Now we can actually continue drawing this path just by clicking on that anchor point with our pen in that state, and say we wanted to draw a rectangle. Let me just go ahead and drop in a couple more anchor points here, and you can see how we're continuing to draw this path. Now notice we haven't closed this path off here yet. We have an open path. Now with the pen tool we can actually close this path off just simply by mousing over that very first anchor point that we just drew. And you can see that again the state of the pen tool changes, and we now have a little circle next to the pen tool. So let me go ahead and click on that first anchor point, and you can see here that we've got our rectangle. Now it's almost a rectangle. We have a little bit of an angle going here. I want to go ahead and switch over to my convert anchor point, my direct selection arrow by holding down the control modifier key, and let me just click on this anchor point here and drag it over a little bit. Alright, so that looks like a rectangle, and you can see the value of being able to switch to our direct selection arrow using a modifier key. Now there is one other way that we can actually close this shape off. Let me go ahead and just deselect it here, and I'm going to use my direct selection arrow to select just a path. Let's select this path right here, and let's delete that by hitting backspace. We now have a path that is not closed again. So let's say we wanted to close this path off without using the pen tool. We can actually hold down our control modifier key and draw a marquee selection around just these two anchor points on the left side. We could then come up to Object and choose Path, and then join those two anchor points right there. You notice the keyboard shortcut for that is Control J. And you can see here that a path is created between those two anchor points, and it's closing this shape off. Now, there are some other tools nested underneath our pen tool here. Let me just go ahead and detach this tool set from our tool panel, and I'll pull it over here. Now, we're going to talk about these two in just a few minutes, but let's talk about this tool right here. This is called the Convert Anchor Point tool, and the keyboard shortcut to access that is Shift-C. Now, let me go ahead and turn that on here. What this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to convert an anchor point. Now, this is a corner anchor point. If we wanted to convert this anchor point into a smooth anchor point, remember, a smooth anchor point has two Bezier handles. So if we wanted to convert that here, we could just simply click on that anchor point with this Convert Anchor Point tool and drag. And you can see we're pulling out Bezier handles now, pulling those out in either direction. Now, take note, it is important to pay attention to which direction you pull these Bezier handles out in. If we were to pull these out in the opposite direction, you can see that we're sort of looping our path on top of itself here, creating sort of a curl there. If that's what you're going for, great. If not, then you may want to make sure and pull those out in the opposite direction. So let's go ahead and pull those out here. Now, what makes this tool so valuable is that we can actually access this tool as a modifier key from our pen tool just simply by holding down the Alt key. You can see the Convert Anchor Point tool there. Now, we're going to get into this more in just a little bit, but let's go ahead and talk about drawing a different kind of path. Let's talk about drawing a curved path with the pen tool. Let me go ahead and just deselect this object. And I'm going to go ahead and reveal some hidden guides here. Now, we've talked about guides before. Now, we can actually show the hidden guides by going to View, choosing Guides, and Show Guides. Or you can remember here that the keyboard shortcut for that is Control semicolon. Alright, so we've got some guides here. Let me go ahead and get rid of this path that we've just drawn. I'll go ahead and get rid of that here. And let's grab our pen tool again. I'll zoom in on one of these paths here. Now, the pen tool can also be used to draw curved paths. So, much in the same way, we're going to go ahead and drop in our first anchor point, but instead of just clicking on our artboard here, we're going to click and drag. So let me click and pull down. Notice that we are pulling out Bezier handles immediately from the first anchor point here. So we've drawn in our first anchor point and pulled out the Bezier handles for it. Now, I'm going to come over here and drop in a second anchor point, and I'm going to pull the Bezier handles up for this anchor point. Just like so. And you can see here that we've drawn a curved path now using our pen tool. Now, let me go ahead and come in here. I'll deselect that path, and let's pull the Bezier handles out in the opposite direction. I'll pull this anchor point down, and I'm going to hold Shift here. Now, Shift is going to constrain our anchor point and Bezier handles to 45-degree angles. So if I spin that around, you can see here that we're snapping to 45-degree angles. And if I release Shift, we can really release those Bezier handles anywhere. So I'm going to hold Shift and pull down, constrain that, and let's go ahead and pull down again with this second anchor point. Alright, so you can see the difference in the path we've drawn. We've sort of drawn kind of an S-shaped path just by pulling the Bezier handles out for the two anchor points in the same direction. Alright, now I know we're throwing a lot of modifier keys out there, but I want to go ahead and show you another important modifier key here. So let me deselect this curve path, and let's go ahead and draw in another one here. Let's go ahead and pull these Bezier handles up for this one. Just like so. Let's go ahead and draw another anchor point here. Let's go ahead and pull those down. Alright, now as I'm drawing this anchor point and pulling out the Bezier handles, let's say that, maybe I am questioning where I dropped that anchor point. I want to go ahead and reposition that. Now, without releasing my mouse button or picking my pen tool up from my tablet, we can actually hold down another modifier key to reposition our anchor point. That modifier key is the space bar. So let me go ahead and hold down the space bar now. And you can see here that we can move the anchor point around. The Bezier handles actually freeze in place, but we can actually move this anchor point around. Maybe we wanted to move it down here. Drop it right about there. Let's pull it over some, and then release the space bar, and we can continue pulling out our Bezier handles. So we can reposition an anchor point as we draw it using the spacebar modifier key. I'll just go ahead and release that, and let's deselect that path here. Alright, so let's get a little trickier with the pen tool here. Let's talk about maybe we want to draw a straight line that goes from straight to curved. So let me come down here, and let's take a look at some other guides here. And let's go ahead and start drawing a straight path here. Let's go ahead and just click one anchor point and click our second anchor point here. And let's say we want to create a curve here now, extending this path over. Now let me go ahead and hide my guides again here so we can see what's going on. And if we mouse over this anchor point, you can see here that the mouse state changes, and now the little icon next to it looks like a picture of our Convert Anchor Point tool. This is important because if we click now on this anchor point and we drag, we can actually pull out one of the handles from our anchor point. We're not pulling out both of them, we're just pulling out one. So we're directing where the next path is going to go. So let's go ahead and pull that up to right about there. And let's go ahead and draw in another anchor point right about here. And if we pull those Bezier handles out, you can see here that we have both anchor points have a Bezier handle that's going to control this curved path segment right here. So that's one way we can actually draw a straight path that turns into a curved path. Now, notice we had to actually release our pen tool from the artboard here and then click down and pull out the Bezier handle manually. There's actually one other way to do that here. Let's go ahead and draw that line again, and I want to go ahead and add the first anchor point and the second anchor point here. But instead of actually releasing my mouse button or my pen tool from my tablet, I'm going to actually just hold it down here. And then I'm going to notice that the pen cursor changes to a little black arrow. That indicates that we're drawing our path right now. I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Alt key with my mouse button pressed. And notice here that holding down my Alt key is going to allow me to pull out that one Bezier handle here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. And let's go ahead and draw our third anchor point here. And you can see we've drawn virtually the same path without having to come back and click and drag out this Bezier handle here manually. So pretty cool. Let me just deselect that. Now, let's just say for a moment that we want to do the exact opposite. We want to follow a curved path segment with a straight path segment. And that's going to actually work a little differently. So let me just come over here into some of this empty area, and let's go ahead and draw a curved path segment here. Let me just pull out some Bezier handles, pull those up. That looks pretty good. So we've got our curved path. So notice here that this second anchor point still has the two Bezier handles. There's actually a couple of different ways we could do this. If we were to come in here and mouse over that anchor point with our pen tool, we again get the little convert anchor point tool icon next to it. Let's just go ahead and click on that anchor point one time. And you can see here that by doing that, we get rid of our second handle here. Now, if we wanted to go ahead and close this shape off at this point, we could just come over here, mouse over the first anchor point, and go ahead and close that off. And you can see here that we followed our curved path segment by a straight path segment. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at one other item that the pen tool can do here. Let's just deselect that path and let's zoom out and find an empty space to draw. Let's come down here. Now, let's say we want to draw a curved path. Let me just go ahead and pull out some Bezier handles on a couple anchor points here. And rather than have this anchor point be a smooth anchor point, we actually want that to be a corner anchor point because we want to draw another curved path sort of similar to this one. Now, we can actually use our modifier key for the convert anchor point tool, which is Alt, and hold that down and then reach over and grab this handle here, and let's go ahead and pull this up and drop it right on top of that first handle. So now when we draw our third anchor point here, you can see here that instead of having a smooth anchor point for this second one, we actually have a corner anchor point. So it's allowing us to create this curved path that has this sort of look to it. Alright, so this type of workflow is actually going to become pretty standard for you as you're drawing objects with the pen tool. If you draw curves like so, you can actually, as you're pulling those Bezier handles out, break those Bezier handles free by holding down Alt, just like so, and create another curve, however you need to, for whatever shape you're drawing here. And you can continue to do that however many times you need to as you're drawing your path. So you can see here how this type of workflow can be very, very valuable. So in this lesson, we have really explored some different methods for drawing different types of paths using the pen tool. In the next lesson, we're going to continue on talking about the power of the pen tool and explore how we can modify existing paths using our pen tool.